Okay. Thanks for coming along, everyone, today. Today I want to talk to you about a couple of things. Firstly, about bad things that happen when content strategists try to take on too much, but also about how I'm trying to make classical music fun, so it's not all bad news. A bit about me and the context I'm coming from. So I'm the editor of ABC Classic FM online. That's Australia's national classical music network. Now, I don't expect you to all know about what's happening in Australian media and classical music, so I'll just give you a brief summary of what the ABC is about. The ABC is Australia's national broadcaster. We've been around since 1932. There's 4 TV channels, there's over 60 radio networks spread across the country. There's talks, there's music, there's news, there's sport, and a newly launched radio station called ABC Classic 2, and that's going to be the basis of my discussion today. It's a newly launched stream, which is the sister station to ABC Classic FM. So it's an online-only stream. It's talk-free. It's perfect to jump into if you don't know anything about classical music and you just want something nice to listen to in the background while you work. This here is ABC's Brisbane office. I actually work in the Sydney office, but they've recently got a really cool new office, so I put a picture of it up. So as a content maker and a content strategist, I wear quite a lot of hats, and I'm used to being pulled in a lot of different directions. On one hand, I'm kind of working with stakeholders and I'm trying to get them to understand digital, talking to them about what we're aiming for and what they should be interested in. On the other hand, I'm also working with marketing because I want them to understand my content. I want them to be able to promote it in a really kind of honest way. And I also work closely with design and development team, and I want them to build me beautiful things. And then, of course, there's the audience. I do end up with inquiries from listeners, so I am in touch with them as well. So I'm getting pulled in all these different directions. And I put a lot of time and energy into trying to make this perfect world for my content to be born into. And I'm sure that's to the annoyance of all those around me who would just prefer if I spent more time concentrating on the content rather than project managing them. So as I was saying, I work closely with the design and development team, so that they're made up of designers, developers, and user experience architects. And they're working agile. I look over to them. They're working in kind of 2-week sprints. They're super calm. They know what their goals are for that fortnight. They're not trying to take on the world every week. They've got this kind of measured approach. And I look over to them and I wonder if I could kind of work a bit more like them, work lean. If any of you kind of work in these environments as well, you've probably heard of the terms minimum viable product. So get out a small concept, test it with an audience, get information back, and then iterate on it. So it's all about kind of prototyping and testing ideas. So I guess they're the 2 points I'm going to talk a bit further about, how I tried to take off all of those hats and just use my content hat, but also how in doing so I was trying to learn from the UX and developers around me who are working agile. So let's just stop for a second and think about Mr. Bach over here. I'm just taking a punt here, but I reckon while he was spending lots of time in a church, writing music, performing music, he probably wasn't spending that much time thinking about how his audience was getting to the church, whether the priest kind of fully understood the creative motivations behind his compositions. So he was just concentrating on his content. And I think, wouldn't it be great if as content makers, just sometimes we could spend a couple of months or a period in the lead up to the launch of a new product just thinking about the content. And that's not thinking about the functionality of a website, not thinking about do we have a favouriting option here or can we playlist over there. Just thinking about the words on the page, the images on the screen, the audio people are hearing, the video they're watching. Now, not all sites are going to be able to take this approach that I'm talking through today. But at ABC Classic 2, we are taking this approach of doing publish, measure, learn, build. Now, I'm totally aware of the bad stereotypes around classical music. You know, it's a bit dusty, perhaps conservative, not all that fun. And that's something we definitely wanted to break away from. This was from a Google search of some classical music CD covers, just a short selection of some pretty appalling kind of covers. I particularly like the one up in the top left here, which if you can't see it at the back, it's Music for Your Plants. They seem to be playing to an indoor fern, but anyway. Okay, so back to Classic 2. To be honest, Classic 2 started out as a bad project. It had been in a strategic plan for a couple of years, but it hadn't been actioned. So the scope was a little vague, and depending on who I asked, I was getting different ideas of what it was going to be. So it was a project that could have taken off in a lot of different directions. There were a few elements of the content offer which were going to make it stand out from others. The main one was that it's performed 100% by Australian musicians, so orchestras, ensembles, soloists. And, you know, that's nice for an Australian audience, but it's not really an incentive for somebody who just wants some background music to turn it on. Like, if you want to listen to background music, there's plenty of ways you can do it online. There's Spotify, there's Rdio, there's countless classical music streams from across the world that people could tune into. So there is nothing new about this core product. That made me think that the difference was going to have to be in the packaging. It was going to have to be in the tone of voice we used in the product. It was going to be in the way that we created content to support the stream. So with that thought, I decided that we needed an awesome website to accompany this stream. We needed an awesome website to help us stand out from the crowd. Yeah, so, you know, you put classical music into a Google search, you get 72 million results. So it was a pretty dumb idea of me to go, oh yeah, I need a website to make my product unique. No, a website is not what I needed. What I was doing was going through the way we'd always done things at the ABC. If we're launching a new product, well, yes, we have a website, we have social media accounts, we think about apps, rather than trying to think about things differently and going back to the actual needs. So you probably won't be surprised to hear that the team of designers and developers couldn't quite prioritise this project. And I think that from their perspective, they probably thought I had no clear content goals. I did have ideas in my head, but they weren't documented. Ideas in your head or conversations in corridors don't count for anything. They're easily brushed over and dismissed with other things that are getting pushed. What I was doing was I was wearing my project manager hat. I was thinking that getting a design and dev team onto a project needs a lot of time. You need to schedule in the resources. You need to get them kind of penciled in, or otherwise you might miss out. So I was trying to get them penciled in before I really knew what I wanted them to build for me. So that was a bit of a glitch in my plan. I had no development team, no documented content plan. I had a stream and I had a launch date. So there was a station manager who was waiting to get this stream with a website on a particular date. So it was turning into a project that needed some serious saving. So when I mentioned having, you know, ideas in corridors and conversations, but not an actual documented content plan, what I really had was an editorial hunch. I mean, I've got a journalism background and am used to working with people from a news and current affairs background who have become digital managers, and they do still rely on editorial hunches alongside using stats and other research. So my editorial hunch was around this different packaging for a classical music stream. So I hadn't done any contextual inquiries, I hadn't done user interviews, I hadn't done any of that in-depth one-on-one research that UX colleagues would do. And there was a great presentation yesterday by Lisa from gov.uk who did point out, just call 5 people, talk to 5 people, it's better than nothing. But I hadn't even done that much. So I didn't have any way to prove that I was making the right decision in a way that my peers would value. But I think there is value in an editorial hunch, and I feel like we need to find ways to document this sort of knowledge. So it might be because you've worked in a particular industry for years and you have kind of in-depth knowledge from that perspective. You might be a subject expert, or it might be from having a lot of interactions with your audience. So how do we try to kind of talk about that type of knowledge alongside the more traditional paths of UX? And I think it doesn't even need to be your own editorial hunch. Sometimes that editorial hunch might come from a senior stakeholder, somebody that you need to trust as well, that their opinion is something that you can follow up on and kind of try and document. Now, I'm not saying that that is something that could replace UX, or it's even, seen as something that's the same as UX. But it would be nice if we could come up with a way to put it on the table at the same time as UX research, a way that we don't need to dismiss entirely a kind of gut feeling. I know Margot Blumstein was also talking about instinct yesterday. So with no content goals, I was stubbornly pursuing this website. I was following my editorial hunch, and I thought, I've built websites before. It's easier than ever for people to get content online, so that's exactly what I was going to do. So I kind of made an arbitrary decision to go with Tumblr. And what I failed to see when demanding a website was that what I wanted was digital content. I wasn't looking for a site and functionality. I wanted a place to put stories, to put images, to put video. So given that content was my area and I had a small team of content makers, we decided to jump in and use Tumblr. And in looking at just some of the elements of building a site, we kind of eliminated the need for a designer, developer, UX, the scoping phase. We didn't need to think about user journeys. We weren't thinking about sitemaps. Essentially what we were doing were, in order to reach our goal, we needed to kill off the hostages. So we killed off the need for designers, developers, UX. We were being really quite self-sufficient. And as I like to say, we de-scoped until we really started enjoying it. We just kept cutting things away, and it turned into something very manageable and achievable. The Tumblr interface is quite naturally stripped back, as most of you probably know, and I think it lets content shine. Another great thing about the Tumblr interface is that we knew that out of the box it was going to be responsive to mobile devices as well. So it was ticking a lot of boxes without us needing to build anything. I like to, in my head, Tumblr is a bit like the universally known IKEA utensil holder. It doesn't hold utensils, but you just pile the content in at the top, and then it continues to kind of seep out the side through social sharing. Of course, the other attraction of Tumblr was the community that we found there. The most innovative content around classical music, I think, is coming from Tumblrs at the moment. It's not coming from broadcasting organisations, and it's not coming from traditional media or even arts organisations. So it was on Tumblr that we were finding the people who were breaking the classical music stereotypes, having fun with classical music content. And I think that's because they were creating content for the internet. They weren't repurposing old media content for online. So that was a pretty exciting kind of thing to be part of. So this is one of my favourite classical music Tumblrs, composers doing normalshit.tumblr.com. This is based on a Tumblr that preceded it, which was called Rappers Doing Normal Shit. So what the rappers can do, we can do over on the classical music side as well. This particular one is Sibelius looking dapper, having tea. And what I love about it is that it's an easy entry point to classical music for people who don't know anything about it or care to know anything about it. It's a nice historical image. it's got a short bit of text, and it kind of contextualises composer names that you may have heard of, but you don't really think of them as real people. They're just these dead white guys. Here's this is Elgar smoking a cigarette with his dog Marco. Not looking particularly happy. And this one is Bartok being a father. And they did a series of composers with their children around Father's Day, or such and such being a father. And this one is John Cage smoking a cigarette whilst playing chess with Marcel Duchamp. This particular Tumblr here, Fuck Yeah Classical, is making classical music a lot of fun. So they have a huge following, and they're actually a massive part of the classical music industry. But and I'm saying that just from seeing how many followers they've got and how many notes they get on Tumblr. I'm not actually sure how aware the classical music industry is of this particular Tumblr. But that's okay, because we're not trying to serve the classical music industry with what we're doing with Classic 2, and we're not trying to serve our colleagues. And in fact, it was amusing, when we did launch Classic 2, this Tumblr was one of the first ones we followed, and that meant it turned up in the footer of our page, their logo, Fuck Yeah Classical, on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's new classical music stream. And a couple of my Classic FM colleagues who'd been around for decades did, express some disappointment with the direction we were taking it in. And I went, yes, it's working. You're not the person I'm looking for. If they were happy with what we were doing it wrong. And just one more Tumblr example we were looking with. So NPR Music Tumblr was a really useful tool for us to have to point to, because it switched the risk. We could say that NPR Music, big broadcasting, respectable brand, similar industry to us, they're on Tumblr. So if they're on Tumblr responding to fans, posting content, and we're not, well then we're kind of missing out. Shouldn't we be part of that same community that they've clearly shown is a safe place to be? Right. So 2 things had happened by this stage when I got to the publish part of my publish, measure, learn, build experiment. One, I'd accepted that the design and development team weren't going to build me a website. But secondly, I'd got my boss on board in supporting the idea of doing a Tumblr instead of a website. So it meant that effectively we were at the stage of testing editorial processes and publishing content months before we were launching the product. So when we were immediately focusing on content, it meant we were doing some stuff that seems a little boring, but it's quite good to get out of the way months before you're going into an editorial process. So we were talking about, when's the best time to have our weekly editorial meeting? How are we going to pitch ideas? What documents are we using to manage the kind of pitching and production process across the 3 staff working across 2 states in Australia? We were thinking about what software do we need to create memes, which is, quite a big part of the Tumblr platform. So what we were doing is we were making editorial lean in order to test these ideas. So as well as working out the production process side of things and the editorial workflow, we were pitching ideas and actually creating content. So this is something we could do because classical music isn't particularly newsworthy. Like if you're working on news or sport or something that's a bit timely, you can't kind of work on content for a month before launch and save it up. But this has served us really well to have a stack of content ready for launch that we could then just put out in dribs and drabs. And it also meant that we were able to start disseminating this content to like a close group of colleagues to get their feedback on what they thought of the content. So I'll just talk you through some of the examples of what we've created in that time. This particular post, Six Composer Babes from History, comes from one of my content writers, Ramona Kermy. Now, she has a background in women's magazines. I think that's where this headline came from. Just to read a bit to you, it says, "Back in your box, Justin Timberlake, move over Beyonce. Classical composers have been charming the masses for hundreds of years, and there are enough kinky stories from the road to fill an entire year's worth of new ideas." So what we realised very quickly was that the Tumblr was going to be an easy beast to feed. For anyone that's kind of managed a sort of content-based website, you probably have been in that position where you have all these sections of the site that need feeding, that you need the content to stay fresh, so you're churning stuff out to make this section look up to date, that section up to date, and quality ends up dropping because you're so in need of just getting more content to fill the site. So with Tumblr, just stacking one thing on top of the other, we didn't have multiple places to feed. And we also knew that we could do reposts, we could point to other content, as well as doing longer posts like this one. So we were able to start measuring the amount of effort was required to put together an article like this. So this one required some research, it required writing it up in our tone of voice, finding images. That image is actually a GIF that goes through the six composers. This particular one here, a soundtrack to the World Cup, is an example of just a fragment of content. It's something we probably wouldn't have done if we had a traditional website. All we've done is point out that, oh, hey, there's a Brazilian composer and it's World Cup time. And then we whacked in a playlist. So quite quick to churn out, but it meant that we could play in some hashtags that were outside of classical music as well, try to get our content to people with different interests. Yeah, we had the same thought. When our eyes lay upon our stylised image of Purcell, we're like, wow, that dude's got hair. I'm sure this is just the first in many images where we're going to make fun of his hair. So this is another post from Ramona where she kind of just went, oh, hang on, Beyonce's got hair, let's whack them together. That didn't take much longer than the idea itself, putting the two images together. And the flexibility of this is that it works across other platforms as well. So this was something we could whack up on Facebook, and images tend to do well and shares. And put some of our brand in there as well, so that we could get the word out about ABC Classic 2. And this is an example of a longer piece, the Power Couples of Classical, A Brave Love Affair. Let me just read you a couple of the intro sentences. So this is Benjamin Britten and his opera singer partner, Peter Pears. Now, Benjamin Britten wrote in a letter to his partner, "My darling heart, I do love you so terribly. Not only glorious you, but your singing. What have I done to deserve such an artist and man to write for? I love you, I love you, I love you." And then Peter Pears responded with, "Love is blind, and what your dear eyes do not see is that it is you who have given me everything right from the beginning. I am here as your mouthpiece, and I live in your music." So this is a great example of how we have adapted our content for the Tumblr platform. This would have made a really great 2,000-word feature. It's a strong angle. There's a lot of examples that we could have fleshed out to make into a feature piece, were we a music magazine or a traditional kind of music website. But for Tumblr, we've broken it up into like a series of 6. And that means that there's shorter chunks of content, because on the Tumblr platform it's kind of more about the scroll and the quick consumption. The good thing about that is that we can push this out over time and not need to create a long work in 1 week. But we can also link them together through hashtags. So somebody who comes in halfway through the series can still kind of work out that there's other content that goes with it. every presentation needs a cat pic, right? If you can't read that up the back, it says, "What do you mean, vet's office? You said we were going to the Philharmonic." Okay. So this is where I, come totally clean and say I'm retrospectively labelling this a content experiment. At the time that we were trying to launch a product, I just needed a website to go with my stream. I needed to satisfy my stakeholder, the station manager. And it's only retrospectively that I'm turning my editorial hunch into something that can be measured. I'm trying to come up with a process that I can document what we're trying to achieve through the editorial hunch and how we can measure that it's actually doing what I'm claiming that it would do. So hopefully this can be something that my peers in UX and design development can take on board and understand, rather than my corridor conversations or my ideas that aren't documented. So one of the key goal of the Tumblr was to convert consumers of the content into listeners of the stream. We might find out that the Tumblr is successful and the stream isn't. So that's something we're going to have to deal with if it turns out that way in 6 months. And we did only launch the Tumblr and the stream less than a month ago. So while early stats are looking good, it's too early to tell, which of either is a success. The other goal of the experiment has been to identify what sort of content types are resonating with our audience. So after 6 months or so of doing these posts and seeing which ones are getting shared and getting visited and getting engaged with, we can use that to develop a website. Should we even decide that we need a website in 6 months' time, we can use that data and that sort of audience feedback to work out how we would structure a site, how we would label sections, how we would prioritise one content type over another. The other thing we're in a good position to do is to measure the return on our effort. So as I was talking about, like the Composer Babes article before, that takes a bit more time to put together, but we can immediately see how many visits we're getting and whether that's worth continuing with the longer post style, or if we're finding that the shorter posts that are really quick to do are having the same success, we can start changing the types of posts we're doing. Because we don't have that problem of sections of a site to feed, if we suddenly drop a particular post style, it's not like I need to run to the design and development team and say, "Oh, could you please change my website? We don't want to do this thing anymore." We can just stop doing it. We can also morph our tone of voice in a sort of gentle way and try out different things without needing to kind of rebrand ourselves. It's a very stripped back site. And of course, the other thing we could measure pre-launch was our risk. So this was a really low-risk setup. It was a new brand. There were no expectations around what was going to come of it. And it wasn't expensive or time-consuming to put together. So if it is a failure, or if it was a failure already, we could have mopped up the damage pretty easily without too many people noticing that this thing had come up and then died off. So, of course, there are times when you are going to need to just fully scope out your project with design, development, UX and content all at once. So this isn't a style that's going to work for everyone, but for me, how was I going to know what my audience wants until I found my audience? So that brings me to the learn phase of the experiment. And as I said, it is early days, but there are a number of things that we've already learnt from this experiment. And the first one is about memes. So this one is based on the Office meme of, "Sorry I annoyed you with my friendship." So we posted this under the headline, "Have you ever clapped at the wrong time?" It's a bit of a faux pas if you clap in the middle of a concerto. "Sorry I annoyed you by appreciating your music." So I can assure you that if we had built a traditional website, we would not have been doing memes. think that though when you go into a particular community, you start acting in a particular way that's like the community because you kind of want to fit in. So I think it's quite fun that for a traditional broadcaster who's been around for 80 years that we're now creating memes. I feel like it's a bit of a breakthrough for a traditional broadcaster to be playing in a type of content like memes which are natively of online. We're not just repurposing broadcast content for the web. I know that certainly the meme didn't exist when I was reading newspapers as a student. But of course, the other learning and the flip side to creating new content types like this is that longer features don't work on Tumblr. So that's what I alluded to before. We can't do 2,000 word features. We can't do the long reads on the Tumblr. And so when it comes time to evaluate whether to switch to a website, add a website to the mix, we don't know how our audience will react to longer features, and we need to work out a way to either test that or just jump in cold and start doing them on a website. And yeah, as I mentioned, that we do also need to decide whether we need to keep the Tumblr as well. So with my initial idea being we just need this as an interim measure until the D&D team can build us a website, it wasn't really the plan to keep it going forever, but we're obviously building up people following us, we're playing in that platform. We can't just escape from it and leave no footprint. So we will need to decide how to manage multiple platforms if we're going to build a website as well. Basically, the experiment is just evolving each week as we go along. We discover new questions and we're adding them to the list. So I wonder, do we still need to build websites at all when we've got so many third-party platforms where we can get content to our audience? This experiment for us has changed not only the type of content we're delivering, as in the memes, but it's also changed the context for delivery, that we as a national broadcaster are going to the audience. We're not expecting them to come to abc.net.au. And I think that's quite important, that in the digital media game, a traditional broadcaster can understand that we're not ahead of the field just because we've got access to transmitters and to broadcast mechanisms. In the digital world, we need to start from scratch and earn our reputation on Tumblr just in the same way that any digitally native media organisation needs to do. And of course, the other thing I've really enjoyed as part of this project has been the de-scoping. It's been massively therapeutic to just take away parts of the build. For people who've kind of worked as producers on sites, you know that the list of functional requirements seems to just get longer and longer as projects go along. So for this one, it's been enjoyable to cut things away and make those decisions for myself. I do think that as content strategists, we can be consumed with fighting that good fight, trying to get our ideas up, and we have lofty content ambitions. We want to do a lot and we want to do it quickly. But if we can see our little part of the pie from the perspective of the other elements of the digital design team, UX or developers or stakeholders, I think that then that can be empowering as well. We can make our own cuts rather than, trying to put up everything and then having them cut. So I guess essentially that it's without that distraction of functionality, the content can shine. So that was something really important I discovered during the lead up to launching this site, that suddenly in demos to, say, the director of radio, we were talking about content. We weren't talking about, can you favourite this or can you playlist that? The demo was not about the structure of the site, what it could do. It wasn't the features. It was the tone of voice. It was the style of the images. It was the audience we were trying to attract. So just quickly, I've put together my 5 steps for how to set up a content experiment. Might not work for everyone, but for me, this is how I got there. Work on an unpopular project. If you get a popular project, everyone wants to be part of it. There's going to be a lot of opinions, too many chefs in the mix. But it's unpopular for a reason. There's probably some bad ideas around it. So get rid of those bad ideas, focus in on the kind of redeeming feature. It's also useful to find a precedent, however tenuous it might be. So for me, it was around, this is an interim measure. There's other people doing Tumblrs in media, so we can do one too. It's totally safe. There's nothing too risky here. And that leads in nicely to winning over your boss. Having my boss on side for this project was enormously important for just clearing the way should any issues come up. Getting that endorsement from a senior stakeholder means that you can be left to work on the project and talk it through with only the people who need talking to. And of course, lay low, work quickly. If you take too long, something will get in the way and stop your content experiment. You just need to put your head down and don't talk to too many people. Talk to the stakeholders. Talk to the marketing manager who can say no to a particular design. Talk to the people who might stop it. But don't just kind of tell everyone in the office about your awesome new project, because you just never know who's going to get in the way. So I'll just leave you with Edvard Grieg. So he's a Scandinavian composer who was bringing his own Scandinavian perspective to classical music. So I hope that, like him, we as content strategists can bring our content perspective to the design and development process. Thank you.